Hey guys, I'm cmasupra, and the Elbe Day update for Company of Heroes 2 is here. This is essentially the big, large, giant update in April for Company of Heroes 2, just like the big, large, giant, what did I say? Big, large, giant update in March for Company of Heroes 2 was the March deployment patch. So there are three main things I want to go over in this update. First is two new doctrines that you get as a result of this update. You don't have to do anything for them, they will just be in-game when you log in. They're absolutely free. You don't even have to click on a link and download them, they'll just be in-game. They are the Lend-Lease tactics for the Russians and Mobile Defense Doctrine for the Germans. I don't want to go over them now in the video though, I want to go over them in the game itself a little bit later in the video. So let's move on to the second big thing I wanted to talk about in this video. The second big thing is the pacing of the game. So if you remember back to the March deployment patch, one of the goals with that patch was to make it so that tanks were less dominant, so that tanks came later, so that the infantry early game lasted longer, and they did succeed in doing that with the update. However, they did that by increasing Tier 3 and Tier 4 costs for both the Germans and the Russians, but they didn't touch the super tanks. Now, with the April update, the April Elbe Day update, they have increased the cost of all the super tanks by 1 CP, so they will definitely be coming later in the game. In addition to doing this for the super tanks, they've also increased the fuel cost for most of the vehicles, light vehicles, tanks, whatever. They've increased the cost for most of the vehicles in the game. Not all of them, but most of them. If you look at like the 222 scout car here, the manpower cost has gone down, but the fuel cost has gone up, and this is what you'll see for most of the vehicles that have been modified in this update. The manpower cost will have gone down, while the fuel cost will have gone up. If you look at like the Panther, that's another example. The manpower cost has gone down by 30, and the fuel cost has gone up by 30. So the fuel cost is really what determines it determines when the vehicle will show up on the field, and so that determines like how long the early game lasts and how long infantry really dominates before vehicles show up. So they have once again extended the time that it takes for vehicles to show up by both increasing the command point cost of all the super tanks and the fuel cost of all the other tanks. Even some of the super tanks are now more expensive, like the Tiger is 200, went from 200 to 230 fuel, so now it comes later, and the manpower cost has also gone down. And this is also the case for the Russians. If you look at like the M3A1 scout car, which is an early game scout car from Tier 1, the manpower cost has gone down by 40, but the fuel cost has doubled, increasing by 5. 5's quite a bit in the early game because it is a Tier 1 unit. The third main thing I want to go over in this update is LMGs, and those are the LMG-42 and the DP-28. If we look here, you can read that the goal with LMGs this update was so that they were better at long range and not so good at close range. If we go up to the graphs, the first graph here, the March 25th graph, was the one that they had, or they started using in the March deployment update, and then the April 24th graph is the one that they are now using in the April Elbe Day update. So if we look at the March 25th graph and we look at the LMG-42, which is an orange line, and the DP-28, which is the light red line, so that is this line here, and this line here, you'll see that they are really good at DPS. They have lots of DPS at close range, and then they drop off towards the long range side, even though they really still have a pretty big DPS in the long range. Now with the update, they have a lower DPS at close range and a much higher DPS at long range. They are really good at long range. So if your opponent's using an LMG, whether it's the LMG-42 or the DP-28, you should really charge them while charging through cover, not through no cover, because you'll die in the charge thanks to the huge DPS at long range. But you want to charge them, get in close, and make their LMG not do as much damage. So this is definitely worth noting because it completely changes the way that LMGs have to be used in the game, thanks to the huge increase in DPS at long range and the decrease in DPS at short range. So those are the three main topics I wanted to go over, but I didn't go over the doctrines entirely. I wanted to go over them in-game. So if you look at the Soviets first, you can see that they get the Lend-Lease tactics doctrine. In this doctrine, they get at 2 CPs the DSHK-38 heavy machine gun. That is nothing new. There were just at least one other doctrine. I don't know where it is, but I'm not going to look for it. But that's not a new unit to the game. That's been in the game before. At 4 CPs, you get the Allied Supply Drop, which is essentially a way to give you fuel as the Russians, which will help hopefully aid you in getting the Sherman that you see at the bottom of this doctrine. At 5 CPs, you get a conscript repair kit, which allows your conscripts to repair vehicles, and it's not an ability you have to choose. You want to get it, it exists, and you can repair things with your conscripts. Also at 5 CPs, you get the M5 half-track assault group, which is similar to a German ability that was already in the game, if I can find an example of it. Here we go, here's an example. So at 3 CPs with the German mechanized doctrine, you got an LMG Grenadier squad inside of a 250 half-track. The Russian version is now in the game with the M5 half-track assault group, which gives you guards assault troops armed with PPSHs and PTRS anti-tank rifles inside of an M5 half-track. It's very similar to that. Then at 9 CPs for the end of this Lend-Lease Tactics doctrine, you get the M4C Sherman, which is a bit of a... It's a medium tank, but it comes pretty late if you ask me, and I mean that is at 9 CPs. If you consider what that's going up against, you have like the KV-8 flamethrower tank at 9 CPs, which is a very good tank thanks to its great armor and its flamethrower against infantry. You also get the T-34-85, which is probably going to be comparable to the Sherman. I haven't actually tried it out, but it's probably going to be comparable to the Sherman at 9 CPs, so you are competing against that, although it's really probably going to be a very similar tank. At 12 CPs, you have the ISU-152 that you're competing against, which is a very good tank, so is it worth waiting an extra 3 CPs to get an ISU-152? Or do you go with the Sherman at 9 CPs if you pick your doctrine based on heavy tanks or really super tanks? That's up to you. That's really up to you. In my opinion, I think the Sherman comes kind of late, but I haven't actually tried the doctrine, so I could be completely wrong about that. I will be making videos on the Russian doctrine and the German doctrine, which I'm about to show you later on, sometime soon. So that is the Russian Lend-Lease Tactics doctrine. Let's go over to the German one now, the German Mobile Defense doctrine. So at 0 CPs, you get counterattack tactics, which means that your infantry units will capture territory faster than before, and that seems like a very useful thing to have if you pick your doctrine as soon as the game starts, because you'll be able to capture more territory than your opponent, and you'll be able to get more map control, more fuel, more munitions, and hopefully use that against your opponent. At 2 CPs, we get the Panzer Tactician ability, which is nothing new. It just deploys smoke in front of your tank whenever you use it, so that the enemy is less accurate. At 3 CPs, you get Osttruppen Reserves, which is also nothing new. There's more infantry, which are a bit worse than Grenadiers. At 6 CPs, you get the Puma from Company of Heroes 1. This is the upgunned Puma, if you ever played Company of Heroes 1. This has the 50mm cannon, and so it will be good against light vehicles and tanks' rear armor, probably. At 8 CPs, for the last ability in the Mobile Defense Doctrine, you get a command tank. I've never actually used a command tank successfully, so I'm not going to really say much about it. I probably don't know how to use it, but you get a command tank at 8 CPs, so you don't really get any heavy tanks or super tanks with this doctrine. Instead, you get a whole bunch of other abilities that will hopefully be useful, especially the counterattack tactics ability. Like I said, I will be making videos on both the Russian doctrine and the German doctrine, the Mobile Defense Doctrine, later on, sometime soon. So I will be trying them out soon, but not having tried them out yet, I'm guessing that the counterattack tactics ability that this doctrine gives you is really going to be a very useful ability and will really be what you base this doctrine around. So anyways, guys, that is it for this video. I've covered all 3 major topics I wanted to cover about this update, so I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye, guys.